Cornelius. Vale smiled as if the sunrise over Red Hollow was his private property. He stood before the bank steps, wearing a clean gray suit, a silver-headed cane resting lightly on his palm, and polished shoes without a speck of dust. Behind him, the bank doors were wide open. 6 rifles pointed out from the darkness inside, and all of them were aimed at Ethan Cole. No one on the street dared to breathe heavily. The people who had just escaped from Mercy Ridge were still standing scattered behind Ethan, their faces covered in mine dust, their limbs trembling, their eyes not yet accustomed to the light of freedom. Grace Morgan stood to his left, gun in hand, her gaze as tense as a knife's edge. Clara Hayes sat on horseback to his right, her hair tangled by the night wind, her rifle resting across the saddle. Sheriff Walter Briggs, who had just thrown his badge onto the stone floor in the mine, was now standing behind Ethan with an ashen face. Tommy Reed hid behind the grocery store's porch pillar, his hands tightly gripping the hem of his shirt. Cornelius Vale looked at them as if looking at a small stage he had paid to set up. "Mr. Cole," he said, his voice so polite it sent shivers down people's spines. "I must admit, you cause much more trouble than the profile described." Ethan sat still on his horse. A long night of dust, blood, smoke, gunshots, explosives, and betrayal had not yet made his eyes weary. He looked at Vale. "You are Cornelius Vale." Vale tilted his head in a slight greeting. "Vale Rail Company, the legal owner of much of the land around Red Hollow, the largest investor in this town, and if the people here were a little more honest." He looked around the street. "They would call me the one who kept Red Hollow alive." Grace let out a cold laugh. "By burying people in the mine?" Vale's smile did not disappear. "Mrs. Morgan, I am very glad you still have the strength to slander." Grace raised her gun a little. "I still have enough strength to shoot straight into your mouth." One of Vale's men inside the bank squeezed the trigger. Ethan raised his hand very lightly. "Grace." Grace did not lower her gun, but she did not shoot either. Vale watched that movement and smiled more deeply. "How interesting. People say Ethan Cole only knows how to speak with bullets, but it seems you also know how to give orders." Ethan replied, "I do not give orders. I stop good people from wasting bullets on trash." A few townsfolk standing behind Ethan inhaled sharply. Cornelius Vale was still smiling, but his eyes were no longer smiling. "You should be careful with your tongue, Mr. Cole, especially when the whole town needs someone to be hanged for things to return to order." Clara raised her rifle. "Try hanging him." Vale glanced at Clara. "Miss Hayes, the woman who sings at the Dusty Star, I have heard a lot about you." Clara replied coldly, "Probably not enough. If it were enough, you would be standing further away." Vale chuckled softly. "Courage, a very beautiful quality, and very cheap. It often appears in those who do not yet understand the price of a grave." Ethan looked straight at him. "Did you come out here to talk or to die?" For 1 second, all of Red Hollow froze. No one had ever spoken to Cornelius Vale like that. No one had ever dared. Vale rested his cane on the steps. "No, Mr. Cole. I came out here to do what this town has forgotten how to do." He reached into his inner coat pocket. Grace immediately pointed her gun at him. "Slowly." Vale stopped, looking at her. "It is paperwork, Mrs. Morgan, but I understand. People without laws often fear paperwork more than bullets." He pulled out a warrant with a red wax seal, then handed it to the man in black standing next to him. The man stepped down, opened the paper, and read aloud. "Arrest warrant for Ethan Cole. Charges: murder, destruction of property, assault on legal company employees, inciting a riot in Red Hollow and Mercy Ridge Mine." The townspeople began to whisper. Clara gritted her teeth. "Legal company employees. They are murderers," Vale replied. In this territory, a man who knows how to use ink in the right place is always more legal than a man who knows how to use a gun. The man in black continued reading. Authorized signature, Sheriff Walter Briggs. All eyes immediately turned to Briggs. Briggs stood dead still. No. Vale looked at him, his voice as gentle as a cutting knife. Walter, your signature is very beautiful, though I admit sometimes you sign with a slightly shaky hand. Briggs took one step forward. I did not sign that warrant. Vale smiled. Really? So you are going to tell the whole town that their sheriff does not know what paperwork bears his name? Briggs choked up. Ethan did not turn his head to look at him. He just asked, "What else?" Vale nodded in satisfaction. I always like a man who gets straight to the point. The man in black took out another piece of paper. Grace Morgan, ordered to hand over all documents, ledgers, maps, and evidence related to the disputed property at Mercy Ridge Mine, as these assets fall under the control of the Vale Rail Company. Grace let out a dry laugh. My husband died, so he would not have to sign the paper selling the mine to him. Vale replied, Your husband died in an unfortunate accident, and coincidentally, after that death his debts became due. Grace stepped forward. You created those debts. Vale shrugged. Debt is just another form of truth, Mrs. Morgan. If people sign their names, the truth belongs to the one holding the paper. Ethan slowly got off his horse. The 6 guns in the bank were raised higher. Clara immediately aimed her gun. Grace did too. Briggs put his hand on his gun but did not draw it yet. Tommy held his breath. Ethan stood in the middle of the street, less than 15 steps away from Vale. You have a lot of papers, Vale replied, and you have a lot of corpses behind you. Ethan said, but I only need one question. Vale tilted his head slightly. Please. Ethan looked straight into his eyes. If everything you do is legal, why do you need the Black Viper? The question fell onto the street like an unexploded bullet. The townspeople looked at Vale. The people who had just escaped from the mine looked at Vale. A mother holding her son, who only a few minutes ago was locked deep inside Mercy Ridge, began to cry. Vale swept his eyes over the crowd. For the first time that morning, his smile grew thin. People fear things they do not understand. Sometimes a businessman needs to hire guards. Grace yelled, The guards! They locked people in the mine! Vale looked at her. Do you have evidence? Grace remained silent. Her ledger had not yet been found. The documents at Mercy Ridge might still be buried inside the mine. The survivors were witnesses, but in this land the words of the poor were often lighter than the signatures of the rich. Vale knew that, and he was enjoying it. Ethan looked at Briggs. You are the sheriff. You hear them. You see them. Briggs stiffened. Vale also turned to Briggs. That is right, Walter. You are the sheriff. Do your job. Briggs looked at the townspeople, looked at Henry Shaw, who was being helped to stand in the distance, looked at Tommy, then looked at the badge he had taken off, now still sitting in his pocket like a hot coal. Vale said softly, Arrest Ethan Cole. Briggs did not move. Vale lowered his voice. Walter. Briggs drew his gun. Clara immediately pointed her gun at Briggs. Tommy screamed, Do not! Briggs did not aim at Ethan. He aimed at Vale. The whole street fell dead silent. Briggs said hoarsely, I have done your job long enough. A flash of anger passed through Vale's eyes, but only for a blink of an eye. Then he smiled again. Walter, you are making a very expensive mistake. Briggs replied, I owe this town much more than the money you pay. Vale sighed. Redemption. Always arriving late and badly dressed. He raised his silver-headed cane a little. That was not an accidental movement. It was a signal. A bullet hit the gun in Briggs's hand. knocking it out of his grasp. Briggs fell backward. At the same time, the gunman in the bank opened fire. Red Hollow exploded. Ethan lunged to the left, pulling Tommy away from the porch pillar, just as a bullet shattered the wooden board above the boy's head. Clara returned fire at the bank doors. Grace rolled behind a water trough, shooting down the hanging lantern in front of the bank, causing the darkness to partially cover the doors. Briggs, clutching his hand cut by wood splinters, rolled behind a cargo wagon. Vale did not duck down at all. 2 bodyguards immediately shielded him with iron-clad wooden doors pulled from inside the bank. Ethan pushed Tommy behind a crate and said, "Get down. Do not run." Tommy panted. "This time I am listening. This time is good," Clara yelled. "Ethan, on the roof." Ethan looked up. On the bank's roof, a sniper in black was reloading his rifle. It was him, the one who had fired from Boot Hill, the one who had delivered Vale's warning at Mercy Ridge. Ethan raised his Colt, but the sniper had disappeared behind the chimney. Another bullet fired from the right. Ethan ducked down, the bullet grazing his hat. Grace shouted, "They do not intend to arrest you. They intend to kill all the witnesses." Ethan looked at the chaotic townspeople on the street. Vale did not need to win the gunfight. He just needed to create enough chaos to kill a few witnesses, kidnap Grace, and turn Ethan into the scapegoat. Ethan figured it out immediately. "Clara! What? Get Grace out of town!" Grace yelled back. "No, I am not running." Ethan fired 2 shots at the bank doors, forcing a soldier to step back. "You have the list in your head. If you live, Vale has not won yet." Grace looked at him, angry but understanding. Briggs shouted from behind the wagon, "The main road is blocked." Ethan looked towards the north. "Do not take the main road." Clara understood. "Devil's Pass." Briggs turned pale. "No, no one takes Devil's Pass when being pursued," Ethan replied. "Then they will not expect us to go that way." Vale's voice rang out from the bank amidst the gunfire. "Mr. Cole, running away will only make the warrant look nicer." Ethan looked in his direction. "We are not running." He reloaded his ammunition. "Go ahead." Clara pulled Grace onto her horse. Briggs ran to the small stable next to the blacksmith shop. "There are 3 horses still saddled." Tommy jumped up. "I am coming too." Ethan grabbed his collar and pulled him down. "No, I know Devil's Pass. I know it too. You know the road. I know the shortcuts." Ethan looked at him for half a second. A bullet shattered the sign right above their heads. Ethan gritted his teeth. "Get on a horse, but if I say duck, you duck before I finish the sentence." Tommy nodded vigorously. "Yes." Miles Avery ran out of the church, a shotgun in his hands. "I will keep the townsfolk inside the church." Ethan looked at him. "Close the doors. Do not let anyone stand near the windows." Miles nodded. "And you?" Ethan climbed onto his horse. "I am going to keep Vale busy." Clara, Grace, Tommy, and Briggs were already on their horses. Ethan spurred his reins hard. "Go!" They dashed through the main street, circled past the church, then turned onto the dirt road, leading southwest. Behind them, Vale stepped out of the bank as the gunfire gradually thinned out. A bodyguard asked, "Should we pursue, sir?" Vale lightly brushed the dust off his sleeve. "Of course." The bodyguard looked in the direction they had disappeared. "Devil's Pass is very dangerous." Vale smiled. "I know." He looked up at the bank's roof. The sniper in black appeared in the shadows, his rifle resting on his shoulder. Vale said, "Notify Silas Boone. Close both ends of the canyon." The bodyguard bowed his head. "And Ethan Cole." Vale looked down the dusty road. "Do not kill him too soon." He paused for a beat. "I want him to see himself fail first." Devil's Pass was located 12 miles southwest of Red Hollow. People called it the Devil's Gate, not because of demons, but because that canyon did not need demons to kill people. Two sheer red cliffs stood straight up like giant teeth. The path was only wide enough for one carriage. On one side were sharp rocks. On the other side was a deep abyss. If there were ambushes from above, the people below had only two choices: run into the bullets or jump down and die. Ethan knew that. Clara also knew. Briggs knew it even better. But Grace Morgan needed to reach the old telegraph station in Santa Mira before Vale controlled all exits from this area. She needed to send the names of those who were bribed, the locations within Mercy Ridge, and the testimonies of the witnesses. If that information got out of Red Hollow, Vale would no longer be a businessman. He would become a criminal, and Red Hollow would have a chance to live. Clara rode alongside Ethan. "Are you sure about Devil's Pass?" Ethan looked ahead. "No. That is a terrible answer, but an honest one." Grace spoke from behind. "The detour around Dry Creek takes an extra half-day. Vale will block it first." Briggs nodded. "Devil's Pass is the fastest way to the telegraph station." Tommy chimed in. "Not the fastest." Ethan turned back to look at him. "What did you just say?" Tommy pointed toward the distant rock formations. "There is a mountain goat path. People do not take it because it is too narrow, but small horses can pass. It runs parallel to Devil's Pass for a stretch, and then cuts down near the stone bridge." Clara asked, "How do you know?" Tommy shrugged. "Once I hid from some black viper men. They were too fat to climb after me." Briggs sighed. "This boy ages me 10 years every time he opens his mouth." Ethan looked toward the canyon. If they took the main road, they would ride right into the mouth of an ambush. If they took the mountain goat path, they could avoid a portion of it. But they could also kill themselves before Vale even needed to do anything. Ethan said, "Tommy, lead the way." Clara looked at him. "You trust an orphan boy more than a sheriff?" Briggs answered first. "I do, too." Tommy did not smile. For the first time, he understood that he was not just tagging along with the adults. He was leading them into or out of death. They veered off the main road before Devil's Pass completely came into view. Tommy led them along an almost invisible rocky trail, where thorny bushes scratched at the horse's legs, and the cliff pressed so close that the rider's shoulders scraped against the stone. Grace bowed her head low. "You call this a road?" Tommy replied, "No, I call it a place where no one wants to die, so no one travels it." Clara muttered, "I am starting to like this boy." Ethan remained silent. He listened. The wind, the rocks, the hooves, the breathing, and something that did not belong to nature. A very faint metallic sound. Ethan raised his hand. Everyone stopped. Briggs asked softly, "What is it?" Ethan got off his horse. He knelt down, brushing the dirt on the ground. An almost invisible thin wire stretched across the path, connecting from a thorny bush on the left to a small wooden peg on the right. Clara lowered her voice. "A trap?" Ethan followed the wire with his eyes. A few steps away, a pile of rocks was loosely stacked on the slope. If a horse touched the wire, the rocks would tumble down. Not enough to kill everyone, but enough to spook the horses, causing them to fall off the narrow path. Grace looked at Tommy. "You said no one knew this path." Tommy turned pale. "I thought so." Ethan cut the wire with his knife. "Someone knows." Briggs looked around. "Who?" From the cliff on the right, a small stone fell down. Everyone looked up simultaneously. Saw no one, only the shadows of rocks, the morning sun, and the dark hollows on the cliff face. Ethan said softly, "Mount up." Clara tightened her grip on her gun. "Are they watching us?" "No." Ethan climbed onto his saddle. "They are waiting for us to go deeper." Meanwhile, at the main entrance of Devil's Pass, Silas Boone had arrived. Silas Boone sat on the back of a black horse, his face still bruised from Ethan's punch in the Dusty Star. He was no longer smiling as much as before. People who were defeated by Ethan Cole usually fell into two types. One was fearful. Two was wanting to prove they were not fearful. Silas belonged to the second type. Beside him, more than 10 Black Viper gunmen had divided into 2 groups. One group climbed up the cliff. One group hid their horses behind large boulders in the canyon bed. Caleb Rusk was not present. He was tied up in Red Hollow, and if he was still unconscious, it was the luckiest thing in his life. But Silas did not need Caleb. Silas preferred to do cleaner work. A subordinate asked, "Are we sure they will take this road?" Silas looked at the canyon ahead. "Grace Morgan needs to reach Santa Mira. The fastest way is Devil's Pass." "What if they take the mountain goat path?" Silas turned to him, with cold eyes. "Then we let the ghost handle it." The other man immediately fell silent. No one in the Black Viper liked mentioning the ghost. But everyone had heard the stories. A rider in black who appeared on trails no one knew, fired a single shot, disappeared, left no footprints, left no long-term witnesses. People called him the Ghost Rider of Red Hollow. Silas looked up at the rocky peak, where a dark shadow briefly appeared, and then vanished. He muttered, "If you are up there, Cross, remember that Vale pays for results, not for childish scare tactics." The wind blew through the canyon. There was no answering sound, but from very far away a gunshot rang out. Silas smiled. "They are here." The bullet shattered the rock right in front of Tommy's horse. Tommy almost fell out of the saddle. Ethan immediately pulled the boy's horse's reins, steadying it by a hair's breadth. "Get down!" This time Tommy ducked before Ethan finished speaking. A second shot hissed over the heads of the whole group. Clara spun around, aiming up at the cliff. "I do not see him." Grace pointed towards the glaring sun on the rocky peak. "Firing from higher up," Briggs shouted. "We are exposed." Ethan glanced around quickly. The trail was too narrow to turn around. Ahead was the slope running down to the stone bridge Tommy had mentioned. Behind was the path they had crossed, which was certainly no longer safe. Ethan shouted, "Move forward! Do not stop!" They dashed forward. Bullets fired down from above, not rapid but terrifyingly accurate, not like the Black Viper gunmen who usually fired noisily. This person chose every shot, every beat, every opportunity. One bullet severed the strap of the bag behind Briggs's saddle. Another bullet sliced through Grace's hat. Grace flattened herself down. "These are not bandits," Ethan said. "A sniper." Clara asked, "Do you know him?" Ethan did not answer. He did not know yet. But there was something in this style of shooting that made old memories stir within him. Calm, cold, no wasted bullets, like someone who had once learned to kill beside him. From above, a barrage of rocks cascaded down. It was not natural. Someone pushed them. Ethan yelled, "To the left!" But the path to the left was only half a horse's body wide. Tommy led the way, crouching low, pulling his horse tight against the cliff face. Clara followed, then Grace. Briggs was a half-step slower. A large rock fell right next to his horse. Briggs' horse reared up. He fell from the saddle, rolled on the rocky path, and slid toward the edge of the cliff. Tommy screamed, "We're Briggs!" Ethan immediately leaped off his horse, lunging over to grab Briggs's hand. Briggs dangled over the edge, one hand held by Ethan. Beneath him was an empty space, glowing red under the sun. Briggs gasped. "Let me go!" Ethan gritted his teeth. "You talk too much for a dying man." Another gunshot rang out. Clara returned fire at the peak, forcing the sniper to retreat. Grace dismounted and ran to grab Ethan's shoulder. "Hold on tight." Tommy crawled over and grabbed Briggs's belt. Briggs looked at the boy. "Tommy, step back," Tommy yelled. "No!" All three pulled hard. Briggs rolled back onto the trail, his face pale white. Ethan did not let him rest. "Mount up!" Briggs looked at his horse, which had already run away. "My horse is gone." Clara held out her hand. "Ride with me." Briggs looked at her. "Are you sure?" Clara replied, "No, but I prefer living people over corpses." Another gunshot fired down. Ethan looked up. In a very brief moment, he saw a silhouette on the cliff. Black coat, black hat, a long rifle. Then it disappeared. Grace asked, "Did you see him?" Ethan nodded. Clara asked, "Can you shoot him?" Ethan looked at the distance, the sun's angle, and the wind. "No." Tommy spoke quickly. "The stone bridge is right ahead. Across that is the way down to Devil's Pass." Briggs paled. "Down to Devil's Pass, meaning onto the main road?" Tommy nodded. "But if we cross the bridge quickly, we can reach the western exit before the ambushers." Ethan climbed onto his horse. "Go." The stone bridge appeared between the two cliffs like a giant spine. It was not a man-made bridge. It was a natural strip of rock, narrow and curved, stretching across a deep gorge, only wide enough for one horse to pass at a time. Tommy went first. Clara and Briggs went in the middle. Grace followed. Ethan brought up the rear. As Tommy's horse just set its hooves onto the bridge, gunfire erupted from the other side. Bullets struck the surface of the stone bridge. Tommy instantly flattened himself against the horse's neck. From the other side of the bridge, 4 Black Viper men appeared from behind the rocks. They had been waiting. Briggs cursed. "They locked down the bridgehead!" From behind, the sound of horses also rang out. Grace turned around. "5 more are coming up." Clara looked at Ethan. "Guns in front, guns behind, an abyss below." Ethan replied, "Then what about above?" Clara thought he was joking, but Ethan was already looking up at the left cliff. There was a small rock ledge running parallel to the bridge, about 10 feet higher, as narrow as a knife's edge. Not meant for a horse, but a person could climb it. Maybe. Ethan got off his horse. Clara understood immediately. "No." Ethan handed his reins to Grace. "Get them across while I distract them." Grace asked, "By climbing up there amid a hail of bullets?" Ethan replied, "Yes." Clara gritted her teeth. "Do you know any less crazy answers?" Ethan looked at her. "Yes, but they do not work." He sprinted towards the cliff. The Black Vipers at the bridgehead instantly shifted their targets to him. Clara fired back, each shot forcing one of them to duck down. Grace urged Tommy's horse forward. "Go! Go now!" Tommy led his horse across the bridge, bullets exploding around its legs. Briggs, sitting behind Clara, held his revolver, ring backwards to block the pursuing group. Ethan clung to the rock ledge, climbing up with his bare hands. A bullet struck the rock right next to his hand, stone fragments tearing the back of his hand. He did not stop. At the bridgehead, Silas Boone stepped out. He smiled as he recognized Ethan. "Cole!" Ethan looked up. Silas stood on the other side of the bridge, gun in hand, his black coat flapping in the canyon wind. "Last time in the saloon you had darkness to help you. What about now?" Ethan pulled himself up onto the ledge. "Now I have the high ground." Silas laughed. "Shoot him!" The 4 Black Viper men raised their guns, but Ethan had already thrown a handful of gravel down onto the bridge surface. One man's horse startled, backed up, and bumped into the man next to it. In that moment of chaos, Ethan fired 2 shots. One gun was shot out of a hand. One man fell backward off the rock, not dead but losing his ability to shoot. Clara took the opportunity to spur her horse across the bridge. Grace and Tommy had already neared the other end. Silas saw Grace. "Catch that woman!" 2 Black Viper men rushed out. Grace raised her gun. 1 shot. The first man collapsed to his knees. Tommy threw an entire small sandbag into the face of the second man. That man cursed, bringing his hands up to cover his eyes. Grace kicked him off the path. Clara galloped her horse past the bridgehead, while Briggs fired 2 more shots to the rear. Ethan was still on the ledge. Silas aimed at him. The 2 men looked at each other. The canyon wind blew between them. Ethan knew Silas was not as fast as him. Silas knew it too, but Silas did not need to be faster. He only needed to keep Ethan from seeing the enemy behind him. From the higher cliff, the sniper in black had aimed at Ethan's back. Clara saw it first. "Ethan!" Ethan turned his head a half beat. Too late. But the bullet did not hit Ethan. It hit the gun in Silas Boone's hand. Silas staggered back in horror. Ethan immediately looked up at the cliff. The sniper in black still stood there, but his gun barrel was not pointed at Ethan. It was pointed at Silas. For a moment, Ethan and the sniper in black looked at each other across the distance. Ethan could not see his face, only saw a small glimmer of light on his wrist, an old leather bracelet. Attached to it was a pierced silver coin. Ethan's heart felt as if it were squeezed hard. He knew that bracelet. Sam Whitaker used to wear it. No, it was not Sam. Sam was dead. Ethan had buried him with his own eyes at Mercy Ridge. Then who was this person? Silas screamed, "Cross! What the hell are you doing?" That name echoed through the canyon like a thunderclap. Cross. Nathan Cross. Ethan froze. Clara looked at him. "Ethan, go!" Silas, having lost his gun, retreated behind a boulder. The sniper in black vanished from the cliff. Ethan had no more time to think. He slid down from the ledge, landed at the bridgehead, then jumped onto the horse Grace was holding ready. "Ride!" They charged off the stone bridge, advancing into the final stretch of Devil's Pass. But Vale was not out of traps. Just as they thought they had escaped the bridgehead, an explosion roared ahead. A section of the cliff collapsed, blocking the western exit. Rock dust clouded the sky. Tommy coughed violently. "The road is blocked!" Briggs looked back. "The Black Vipers are coming!" Clara looked at Ethan. "What now?" Ethan looked at the pile of rocks blocking the way. They could not cross it on horseback. They could not turn back. They could not stay still. Grace said, "There is an old drainage crevice at the base of the cliff. My husband used to use it to move smuggled ore out of Mercy Ridge." Ethan looked at her. "Where?" Grace pointed beneath the pile of rocks. "Behind the dead cactus, but it is low. Horses cannot get through." Briggs realized, "We have to abandon the horses." Clara looked at the road behind them, where the hoofbeats of the Black Vipers were drawing near. "Hurry up." They dismounted, unfastening their ammo pouches, guns, and water skins. Tommy gently stroked his horse's neck. "I am sorry." Ethan pulled the boy away. "Horses are smarter than people. It will find a way." Grace ran over to the dried cactus, using her knife to sweep it aside. Behind it was a low, pitch-black rock crevice, only big enough for one person to crawl through. Briggs looked at the crevice. "I hate today," Clara said. "You say that sentence more than a prayer," Briggs replied. "I am praying in my own way." Ethan ordered. "Tommy goes in first, Grace next, Briggs, Clara, me last." Clara immediately protested. "No." Ethan looked at her. "Do not make me argue." "Then do not give stupid orders," Grace interjected. "If you are last, you can hold them off longer." Clara turned to Grace. "Do not help him commit suicide." Ethan placed his hand on Clara's shoulder. "It is not suicide. It is buying time." Clara looked at him, her eyes angry but also worried. "You owe me an explanation about the name Cross." Ethan replied, "If we live through today, you will have it." Clara slipped into the rock crevice. Before disappearing, she said, "You had better live." Ethan turned around. The Black Vipers had appeared in the dust behind him. Silas Boone was no longer smiling. He held his gun in his left hand, his eyes filled with hatred. "Cole!" Ethan stood before the rock crevice, alone, 2 Colts in his hands. Behind him, the rest of the group was crawling through the narrow passage. Ahead of him, 8 gunmen advanced. Silas raised his remaining gun. "This time there is no saloon, no roof, no woman to help shoot." Ethan looked at him. "This time, you still talk a lot." Silas gritted his teeth. "Kill him!" Ethan lunged to the side, rolled behind a boulder, and returned fire. Not to take them all down, but to force them to duck their heads. Every single one of his shots had a purpose. One bullet into the toe of a boot belonging to a man getting too close. One bullet into a rifle, one bullet into a waterskin hanging from a saddle, making the horse panic. One bullet into the rock above Silas's head, making dust fall into his eyes. From inside the rock crevice, Clara shouted out, "Ethan, go!" Ethan fired the final round in his right-hand gun. Silas heard that sound. He laughed. "Out of bullets already?" Ethan looked at the empty gun, then looked at Sis. "Just this one." He raised the gun in his left hand and fired one shot. The bullet hit the silver snake pin on Willis's shirt, blasting it off his chest. Willis stood completely stunned. Ethan said, "Next time it is the heart." Then he backed into the rock crevice. The drainage crevice was dark, low, and suffocating. Ethan crawled through the rock dust, his back scraping against the ceiling. The sound of gunfire behind him, gradually swallowed by the stone. Ahead, Clara was waiting at the other end of the crevice. She grabbed his arm and pulled him out. "You really are the hardest man to kill I have ever met," Clara said. Ethan brushed the dust off his face. "I practice a lot." Tommy stood further away, pointing towards the road opening up at the foot of the hill. "Santa Mira is that way." Grace looked at the sun. "We can still make it to the telegraph station before noon." Briggs looked back at the rock crevice. "Silas will find a way around." Ethan nodded. "Then we go, before he remembers he has legs." They had no more horses, not much ammunition left, no more advantages, but they still had Grace, still had Tommy, still had the truth, and most importantly, Vale had not yet taken Red Hollow. They walked across the dry, rocky terrain west of Devil's Pass. No one spoke much. Each person kept a part of the ambush in their mind. Grace held the image of the people locked in Mercy Ridge. Briggs held the feeling of Ethan's hand pulling him back from the abyss. Tommy held the sound of the very first gunshot, fired at his horse. Clara held onto the name that Silas had screamed, Cross, and Ethan held onto the leather bracelet on the wrist of the sniper in black. Nathan Cross, a name that should not have appeared here. An old friend, a gunman who once rode alongside Ethan through Ash Creek. Someone Ethan thought had disappeared from his life, along with the corpses and an old curse. Clara walked beside Ethan. "You know him?" Ethan did not answer. "The sniper in black, the one who saved you from Silas." Ethan looked ahead. "Maybe. The man I know died in a different way." Clara did not press further, but she understood. In the West, dead men sometimes do not return. Only their past puts on a new coat and holds a gun aimed at you. After nearly 1 hour of walking, they reached a dry creek bed. There were fresh hoofprints there. Grace knelt down to examine them. Not the black vipers. Briggs bent down beside her. One horse, traveling alone. Ethan looked at the hoofprint. The left horseshoe mark was chipped at a corner. He knew this mark. Years ago, Nathan Cross had shot his own horse after a battle in Ash Creek. The left shoe was misaligned, leaving a mark that could never be mistaken. Ethan followed the hoofprints a few steps. Under a small rock, something glinted. He picked it up. A bullet. Not an ordinary bullet. The casing was engraved with a very small cross mark. Clara stood behind him. "What is that?" Ethan squeezed the bullet in his hand. "A message," Tommy asked. "From who?" Ethan looked toward the rocky ridge where the sniper in black had disappeared. "Someone who once called me a brother." Grace frowned. "And now he stands on Vale's side." Ethan looked at the bullet. "No." Briggs asked, "How can you be sure?" Ethan replied, "Because if Nathan Cross wanted me dead," he looked back at Devil's Pass behind them, "I would have died from the very first shot." In the distance, on a high rocky peak, the sniper in black stood watching them. The wind blew his long coat out behind him. He pulled down his face covering. A rugged face, a long scar along his left jaw. The tired eyes of a man who had lived in the darkness for too long. Nathan Cross looked at Ethan from afar. In his hand was a long rifle. He loaded one new bullet. Did not shoot. just held it in his hand. Then he whispered to himself, "It is not time yet, Ethan." Behind Nathan, a subordinate of Vale appeared. "Mr. Cross, Mr. Vale wants to know if Ethan Cole is dead yet." Nathan did not turn around. "Not yet." The other man frowned. "Silas Boone said you missed your shot." Nathan slowly turned his head. "Silas Boone speaks too much." The subordinate put his hand on his gun. "Mr. Vale does not pay for pity." Nathan looked at his hand. "Then tell Vale." He stepped closer. "If he wants Ethan Cole dead, he should hold a gun himself." The subordinate had not yet had time to draw his gun. Nathan had already knocked him down with the butt of his rifle. Nathan looked in Ethan's direction one last time, then pulled his face covering back up. Devil's Pass was merely a greeting. He turned his horse back toward Red Hollow. "The real storm is still ahead." As Ethan, Clara, Grace, Briggs, and Tommy continued walking toward Santa Mira, Red Hollow behind them began to tremble under the hand of Cornelius Vale. Vale did not need a gun to conquer a town. He had a bank, had debt papers, had land deeds, had people who feared losing their homes more than they feared losing their souls. At the Red Hollow Square, he stood before the townspeople, holding his silver cane, his voice as smooth as poison. "Ethan Cole has fled," he declared. "Grace Morgan has stolen company property. Walter Briggs has betrayed the law, and anyone harboring them will be considered an accomplice." Miles Avery stood in front of the church, the shotgun in his hands shaking slightly. A townsperson asked, "What about the people in the mine? They are trapped down there." Vale looked at that person with an air of feigned pity. "I will open an investigation." The townspeople murmured indignantly. Vale raised his hand. "Of course, every investigation requires order. Therefore, from now until the situation stabilizes, the Vale Rail Company will take over the protection of Red Hollow." From the ends of the street, dozens of gunmen dressed in black stepped out. Not the Black Vipers out in the open, but company soldiers. Their guns were cleaner, their clothes were nicer, but their eyes were exactly the same. Miles whispered, "Lord." Vale looked in the direction of Devil's Pass. "Mr. Cole wants a war." He smiled. "Then we will give him a town to bury." In the dry creek bed to the west, Ethan suddenly stopped. Clara asked, "What is wrong?" Ethan looked back toward Red Hollow, even though the town was hidden behind the rocky ridges. "I do not know." Grace asked, "Did you hear something?" Ethan shook his head. "No." Tommy looked at him. "Then what is it?" Ethan squeezed the bullet engraved with a cross in his hand. "The feeling that someone just closed a door behind our backs." Briggs looked toward Santa Mira. "Do we continue or go back?" Grace immediately said, "If we go back, Vale wins. We have to send the telegraph." Clara nodded. "Grace is right. Red Hollow needs the truth out." Ethan looked at each of them. Then he looked at the road ahead. "Then let us keep going." Tommy asked quietly, "What about Red Hollow?" Ethan readjusted his hat. "Red Hollow will have to endure a little more." He stepped toward the west. "Until we return with enough reasons to burn down Vale's empire." They continued walking. Ahead was Santa Mira. Behind was Red Hollow being tightened in a grip. Up high was the shadow of Nathan Cross, an old friend or a new enemy, no one knew yet. And in Ethan Cole's hand, the bullet engraved with a cross lay as cold as a promise. Devil's Pass had not managed to kill them, but it had done something more dangerous. It had opened the door for the past to step out into the light. If today's episode made you feel like you yourself are trapped between the two cliffs of Devil's Pass, please subscribe to the Tales from the Wild West channel. In the next episode, the Ghost Rider of Red Hollow, a rider in black, will emerge from the shadows. Nathan Cross will no longer be just a name, and Ethan Cole will have to face the most painful question: the man who was once his brother. Since when had he become Vale's snake? Leave a comment to let us know. Do you think Nathan Cross saved Ethan because of their old brotherhood, or simply because he has an even more dangerous plan? Do not forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell, because in this Wild West, sometimes a bullet does not kill you right away. It merely brings along the name of the one who will do it in the end.